Hello and welcome back to Desperate Living. Now, when I set this channel up, the plan was to do quite a lot of interviews, and clearly we haven't really done that. Plenty of reasons, all very valid, but now it's time to actually get back into the original plan. So today I'm talking to David Gregory from Severin Films, somebody who I've known for 25 years, since he was releasing stuff on the Exploited label in the VHS days, and obviously he's come on leaps and bounds since then, not only as a distributor of interesting and unusual movies. Check out our Severin unboxing video if you want to see the kind of thing that Severin do and somehow are unfamiliar with them, but also as the director of really interesting lost tales, I suppose, documentaries. That's probably the best way of describing them. I mean, things like Lost Soul, his story of the unmaking of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. Obviously the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shocking Truth. A great number of DVD and Blu-ray extras over the years. And most recently, Enter the Clones of Bruce, which is a documentary about Bruceploitation and the various Bruce Lee copycats, Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Bruce Dragon Lee, you name them, who made all those films in the 1970s, some of which are fantastic. And as you can see, this is a chunky box set that contains not only the documentary film, but also 12 remarkable Bruceploitation classics, including some of your favourites, The Clones of Bruce Lee, The Dragon Lives Again, movies like that. So absolutely well worth picking up. So I chatted to David about Bruceploitation, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Censorship, and much more, some of which we're saving for a future video, our long-awaited and long-in-production Video Nasty special. But the rest of it you'll find here, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, David. How are things?
Very good, David. Nice to see you again.
You too. And I think since I last saw you, there's been a lot going on. Obviously, the most important thing immediately, or most recently, is the announcement of the Russ Meyer films.
Yes.
So, given that those have been like the holy grail for however long, how did this come about?
Well, it's been a long time coming. I mean, they basically, as you know, these films have been out of circulation. Certainly in the US, they've been out of circulation for decades, basically, and they haven't actually been remastered since Russ first transferred them to tape. So for the video era releases. So that's a while. That's
Mm.
yeah, it's like probably it's like 40, close to half a century,
Yeah.
basically, since they've actually been remastered. So we've been a lot of companies have tried to do this over the years, but the Meyer estate has very specific requirements and it has a lot to do with what Russ would have wanted. And
Mm.
so being fans of him and the way he distributed his own movies, including the packaging, was not an issue for us. But we had to kind of make a case that we were going to do it a certain way and put a lot of
Yeah.
kind of legwork into it in order to convince the estate that we were the right company to go with, because we're one of several who would have wanted to do this. And eventually we got there. I mean, it took a while, but I mean, we were able to show that our intentions were honest and that we wanted to give these films the best possible reintroduction into the market that we could, that anyone could, and that involved doing the kind of highest end 4K restorations of the film from the original negatives. Now, one of the things that was particularly exciting when we started the negotiation a few years ago was to find out that the film elements did actually still exist, because there'd been a lot of rumor
Yeah.
about what had happened to Russ's films since he passed away, or since he got ill, actually, before he
Mm.
passed away. And a lot of it was just ill-informed rumor mongering. Basically,
Yeah.
nobody really knew, and the estate weren't making it public because they were still working out what they were going to do. But the good news was that the elements which had formerly been stored on Russ's property while he was alive in sheds in his garden, all that was removed a long time ago and actually sent to proper archives like the Museum of
Right.
Moving Image and the Academy of Motion Pictures, who were storing the elements in the conditions that they needed to be stored. The only
Right.
one of the films that we have remastered so far that had problems was actually his last film, Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens, which actually had water damage to the negative. Which
Right.
was a real shame. But I would say, after 400 hours of restoration, we got it looking pretty damn good.
Mhm. Because that was what I was wondering. I mean, obviously all this stuff has been out of circulation for so long, and as you say, not remastered for ages. So I mean, do you have access? I mean, this might not be something that you can discuss, but I mean, do you have access to any of the material that's previously not been released on home video?
That material is there, I can tell you that. But no, at this point, we basically we've done 5 licenses at this
Mhm.
point, and so far it's been actually nice working with the Meyer estate and Janice, who is the
Right.
chief executive of the Meyer estate. We've been getting along very well because we see eye to eye on what needs to be done. It's
Right.
just a lot of work goes into each film. So pretty soon we'll be discussing, if we're going to do more.
Right. Cool. So, I mean, recently you guys, I was just watching earlier this week the wonderful Bruce documentary,
Yes.
which is, is one of those stories that you couldn't make up if it was as fiction. It's just so mad. Um, but you seem to be kind of doing more kind of feature-length documentaries and box sets now. I mean, is this the way that you see things going for like boutique labels as as the market shrinks and becomes more specialized?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the way the boutique label business is going, but it is the way that Severin is going. And
Yeah.
the reason for that is well, in both cases, in documentaries and box sets, there's different reasons. But
Mm.
with the box sets, we kind of made a sort of Faustian deal where basically once we did our first kind of comprehensive box set, which I think was the Al Adamson box set,
Yeah.
it outperformed our expectations quite significantly. Then followed up by the Andy Milligan, same thing. Like, did
Mm.
not realize there were that many Andy Milligan fans in the world. And then, of course, when we did all the Hornsby hours, it just took it to a whole nother level. Same with Black Emmanuel. And so now we've kind of given these market expectations that if we're going to approach a subject and do a thorough box set, it's going to be really thorough. And
Mm.
so there's problems associated with that, of course, because there's a lot of money and a lot of time has to go into that, not to mention the films that you need to find from various different licensors that aren't available for various reasons. So these
Yeah.
things end up taking a long time and cost a lot of money to produce. And for a, fairly limited market, but like I say, it's less limited than we would have expected. So it's definitely
Yeah.
something that's worth doing for the right subject. So we've got several others in play. The problem now is that people just keep on throwing the word, hey, if you're going to get this film, let's do a box set and get this, and this. And it's like, Jesus Christ, stop making everything into a box set. We've got to do single disc releases in between the box sets because,
Yeah.
everything can't be a box set because they take so long to
Yeah.
complete. With
And presumably, I mean, there must be projects that you would have loved to do as a box set, but you can't because other people own the movies, some of the movies that you need, or
Yeah, I mean,
rights
well,
on stuff not
yes,
available.
that's exactly right. There are certain things like people said, well, obviously Ted V. Mickles is the obvious follow-up, or Ed Wood
Mm.
Jr. is the obvious follow-up to the ones that we've done. But yes, there's just too many of the movies that are either already out, already remastered from other labels, or just we can't get. We can't
Yeah,
get Plan 9 from outer space at this point, so there's no point in doing a Ed Wood Jr. box set.
yeah,
So we ended up doing the adult films just on their own. So yeah, there's all kinds of things like that. But we're doing a lot of smaller box sets as well, like the Danza Macabre collection, where we're just
yeah.
doing gothics from different countries, and it's 4 releases within one box. Those are actually that's just like doing 4 separate discs, and then you package them together, which is good because we end up
Mm.
being able to kind of highlight lesser films with bigger films like Castle of Blood, and then you could put
Yeah.
lesser films in with it. Something like They Have Changed Their Face may not have done so well on its own, but it's a film that people really
Mm.
should see if they're into this kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah. So
So
it's,
that
yeah, it's that thing
that's
of using the more commercial titles to then sell and introduce smaller titles, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And it also means that we can take a risk on certain titles that we wouldn't have done otherwise, because at least now the Danza collections have got enough of an audience that
Mm.
we can afford to be a little more brave with the films we put in there. And as far as the documentaries go, I mean, it's again that's more of a Severin thing than a boutique label thing because
Yeah.
that's what we've been doing since the beginning, going back to Texas Chainsaw with your camera. Basically,
Let's not mention that.
yeah, yeah, me making documentaries. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I ended up going into documentary because of Texas Chainsaw, and then
Mm.
being hired to do extras for Anchor Bay and then Blue Underground and various other companies. That ended up being the thing that I ended up doing. And so,
Yeah.
in order to kind of satiate my filmmaking desires, I like to find subjects which are worthy of an actual documentary feature as opposed to a feature-length featurette, so that we
Yeah.
can actually make them into, a substantial standalone piece. And that's been pretty good for us because while making a documentary at that level, even at the price that we do, which is not expensive compared to kind of mainstream documentaries, but expensive compared to DVD extras or disc
Mm.
extras. But something like Game of Clones, Enter the Clones of Bruce, we can put in a box set, and it's kind of like a driver to buying the box set. Same with Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched or the
Yeah.
Al Adamson documentary.
Yeah, because I guess you know, with the clones set, you've got a whole bunch of really fun movies, but movies that might not have been massively commercial as standalone individual films.
Yeah, I think some of them would be. I mean, it's the same kind of logic with the Danza
Yeah.
Macabre stuff. I mean, I think the clones of Bruce Lee and Dragon Lives Again and even maybe Challenge of the Tiger, things like that, probably would have done just fine on their own. But
Yeah.
then you've got like the B-sides and certain ones where we don't have the best elements. So
Yeah.
they're better off as the second movie on a disc than being released alone.
Yeah. I mean, that must be like another, I suppose, a change that you've seen as you've kind of gone along through like through Blue Underground, through Severin, doing stuff before that. That now there's so much more involved in putting stuff out because people have such high demands for restorations and quality, and that they probably didn't have 25 years ago or whenever
Well,
this was.
certainly. I mean, we grew up when we were just happy to get any version of certain films. So that's
Yeah,
the
because I mean, you started off putting stuff out on tape, didn't you? So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that was frustrating though. Doing the exploited label was particularly frustrating because I that was the beginning of the idea of remastering
mm,
and releasing things in the correct aspect ratio and even putting extras on the tapes as we did.
yeah,
It was frustrating because we were doing it in England and therefore, the films were either banned or cut, and that completely ruins the idea of doing a special edition label if you're going to have a censored version of the film. So obviously, the second I got a chance to get out of England, I took it.
yeah. Well, good thinking. I mean, I mean, how many films did you have in a band, like
Well,
or
we only
series
had
of?
two outright banned, I think. It was Deadbeat at Dawn and Maniac were banned
Yeah,
outright. Well, I guess Last House on the Left. No, Last House on the Left was going to be cut. So, but I think
yeah,
several others were cut. So, but
yeah,
then even in situations like Three on a Meat Hook, which we were amazed it got through uncut, but then the cover had to be censored,
yeah,
so we had to reprint the cover. And at that point, we were selling so few units that just doing another run of printing covers was the difference between profit and not profit that in that
yeah,
first year of it being released. That's how small the margins were. And so therefore, that it was just utterly unworkable. The amount of money that you gave to the BBFC to censor, to give a rating to the film was, a huge cut of what
yeah.
we made of those movies. So that it was a pretty heavy tax for the small label.
Yeah. I mean, weren't you guys warned off from even attempting to release the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Yes, that was in the final days of Furman. I had written to him saying that we had a deal, and we did. We had a deal for the rights to TCM with the owners in Texas, and so I wrote to Furman saying, now's the time. This film isn't dangerous, blah blah blah. And he just wrote back saying, which is amazing because usually he just didn't respond to the likes of me and smaller labels. He only talks to his mate Spielberg and that sort
Yeah,
of. But he did, and he wrote back and basically said it's just highly unlikely. It's the sheet, and you can't even release a cut version because of the sheer terror throughout the latter half of the film, blah blah blah. So we had to cancel the deal. So the second that Furman was unceremoniously walked out of the BBFC, we got back in touch with the owners and said, okay, we can do the deal now because it'll be a new person and nobody in the country thinks this film is dangerous except for James Furman.
mm,
But they'd already sold it to somebody else. Somebody else who was actually in the business was keeping their finger on the pulse. They obviously knew that Furman was going to be walked out before we did, and
yeah,
they did the deal. But the good side of that is that my frustration of that situation actually led me to doing the Chainsaw documentary
yeah,
because it's like if we're not going to do the movie, I'm going to do something on my favorite movie to celebrate its release. And we brought Gunnar Hansen over to tour it and tour Texas Chainsaw the movie because we worked with the company that ended up putting it out, Blue Dolphin, and so of course that actually was probably in the long run better for me because that ended
yeah.
up starting my whole career.
But I mean, when you set Severin up, what was the brief? Because obviously the early stuff was all kind of Euro erotica, really, wasn't it?
Yes. And the reason for that was that it was a pretty busy playing field at that time, and the market was
Yeah,
going down. So
yeah,
there were a lot of labels, many of them formed by people who used to work for Bill Lustig of Blue Underground. All of us went out and formed a label, basically, who would work with him. So there was a ton of boutique labels on the market. The time
mm,
that DVD was dying, this was in 2006.
yeah,
But getting back to the original question, what we decided to do was actually start with the kind of softcore Euro erotica because two reasons. One, whenever those films were released through Anchor Bay or Blue Underground, I knew for a fact that they always did well. They didn't necessarily do well right out of the gate, but they
mm.
always continued to sell. The erotic films
Evergreens.
were absolute evergreens. Things like Salon Kitty and Immoral Tales for Anchor Bay, stuff like that just kept on selling. Even the Franco films like Eugenie and Justine, they would continue to sell.
Mm,
And the other reason was that most of the other labels didn't really want to be known as softcore companies. They dabbled in it, I mean, I think trying to think what's a good Synapse example. Oh, The Image,
yeah,
another very successful title. So but they didn't want to be known for softcore. We didn't have such scruples. We were like, at this point, we need to actually do something to make our place in the market straight away. And we were very lucky because both the first two releases, Gwendolyn and Felicity, were very successful. That didn't mean that we got to rest on our laurels and have the coffers full. We absolutely didn't, because it was only two titles on the market. Doesn't matter
Yeah,
how successful they are, to a point. I mean, unless you're Taylor Swift or whatever. But
yeah.
basically, that even selling a lot of numbers in the boutique business did not necessarily mean we could afford an office or afford to get a load more titles. It's
Mm.
only in the later years where we actually amassed a large library that it's actually given us the freedom to pick up more stuff in advance. It was very much month to month for years, basically, at the beginning of Severin.
Obvious question, but what would be, and let's just stick to stuff that's already out, so you don't have to try and tip anybody off to swoop in. But I mean, what would have been some of your dream movies that you couldn't get,
That we couldn't get.
or that or that other people kind of swept in and grabbed that you would have just loved to have?
That happens fairly frequently, but I actually got used to it a lot more over time. That's just the way it goes.
Mm.
That's let's see. I mean, Vinegar Syndrome got Blood for Dracula and Flesh for Frankenstein, and only
Yeah,
because I kicked up a fuss with Joe about that being like Blood for Dracula being one of my favorite movies of all time, that he was kind enough to sublicense that one to us.
right.
But there's let's think. I mean, Vinegar Syndrome just got The Tenant, which is one of my favorite movies. But there's no
Right.
way I'm going to deal with Paramount, so it's not like we were going to get it. So it's
Yeah.
that's just a reality that you have to deal with. And I got to do the extras, so it's all good. But
That's
yeah, so nowadays I'm much more level-headed about when another label gets a title that we would have done a great job on. I
mm,
actually think it's more frustrating the fact that the studios don't do the kind of job that the boutiques would do on they would consider their lesser titles.
yeah.
They'd be big titles for us because they just don't care, about these what are little movies as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, and also I guess quite a lot of them still make it quite difficult to license that stuff, as you were just saying about The Tenant.
Yes, and I mean most of them have now started to engage in sub-licensing to Vinegar Syndrome, Shout Factory, Kino, the
Yeah.
big bank account companies, or the billionaire labels, as Banana Man from Code Red used to call them. So they're definitely open to it because they're also just like can't be bothered with physical media on stuff that's only going to
Yeah.
sell a few thousand copies, but that's decent for a boutique label. So
Mm.
yeah, so they are open to sub licensing. It just comes with so much paperwork and rules and restrictions. So doing a documentary on something that's one of the studio titles, we then have to go through the various red tape that you have to go through with their legal departments to make sure that you're allowed to put it on the disc and shit like that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I've had like a couple of occasions doing commentaries where it's like, well, this now has to be run through like
Mhm.
MGM or whoever it is that their legal department to make sure you've not said anything that they disapprove of.
Yes, I just heard. I just overheard another label head talking this morning about how somebody said something like they took the subway to the set, and back then the subway was a pretty dangerous place. Talking about the subway in New York,
Yeah.
and the studio made them cut that out. Just because it's like, well, that's potentially, suggesting that we put people in danger coming to make this film, and that's obviously fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. But I mean, the other side of that is that I guess you must get lots of people pitching titles at you. It's like, why don't you release this? Why don't you release that? I mean, obviously, we kind of know why some of the great cult titles are missing in action, but is that must be a constantly frustrating thing that people think that you just haven't heard of some of these films.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I had to somebody else runs our social media because I used to, just get so annoyed and sometimes snap back at people on social media, but they don't know. I mean, it's annoying when people come from a position like they know like that. I'll give you an example. Like people are like, well, you'd sell more units of that box set if you made it cheaper. But that's not
Right.
necessarily true. There's only a certain amount of people who are going to buy an Al Adamson box set, right? And
Yeah.
while I say it was more than we expected, if we'd have made it like half the price, that doesn't mean all of a sudden there's a ton more Al Adamsons. There might be a few people
Yeah.
who would have been able to do it, but I doubt we would have made enough money to make it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
So in
Yeah, because
particular,
you can't reduce the price on something like that to the point where the casual viewer is just going to pick it up because
right.
it's
It's never going to go to Walmart, something
yeah,
like that. So we're not selling in tens of thousands of units. We might have sold an extra 1,000 units or something like that if it was, but
yeah.
then you don't take into account all the fact that the box itself and the packaging is very expensive on those things. So therefore your margin is very small if you drop it significantly.
It does seem that interesting thing with fans these days that they've almost become this greedy machine that whatever you give them, they want more. So, it's like there's no slipcase on this. What's wrong?
Oh yeah, well, I got into trouble over not knowing the difference between a slip case and a slip cover, because
Ah,
I guess we
yeah.
put it incorrectly on our listing, and it caused an absolute storm in a teacup with the 5 people who were very upset about it. But it seemed like it was like we'd murdered their mothers.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have bought this if I knew it opened up at the top rather than the side.
That's that sort of thing. And look, it's the reality is that the people who are boutique label buyers, that stuff is important to them. It's not important to
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
but that's why I'm
yeah.
not in charge of packaging. So there's this. Luckily now I have people to handle that stuff. That's it doesn't all come down to me because I probably, if you put a gun to my head, probably still couldn't tell you the difference between a slip cover and a slip case.
Presumably, you've got an impressive collection of tapes behind you.
Yes. Yes, all my pre-certs.
Oh, yeah, pre-certs. I mean, that must be another frustrating thing that I guess you can never do the full Video Nasties box set, can you?
No.
Again, because other people have that stuff.
Yes, MGM has Last House on the Left.
Yeah.
Sony has The Evil Dead, I think. So yeah, there's uh whoever has, yeah, MGM has The Burning as well. So yeah, there's studios that own several of the video nasties. Yeah,
Hmm.
that would never happen.
Well, that's a shame because I think that one's almost crying out to be done, isn't it?
Yeah, well, absolutely. But we're doing our best to release as many of them as we can and even buy out. So I think we've bought like 8 or 9 of them in perpetuity at this point.
Right. What's lined up immediately that we can talk about?
When is this going live?
Um, Probably early next week. So
Okay, well, so we've got the immediate thing is that we've got the Black Friday sale, which is where we twice a year we do a big sale where the majority of the old library is 50% off SRP, and we introduce 10 new releases at the sale.
right,
That so far we've announced Delicatessen, Slave of the Cannibal God, Rat's Night of Terror, Zombie Creeping Flesh, aka Hell of the Living Dead, personal favorite. And one that very specifically goes back to that time when I realized that the government were lying to us, because when they were claiming that this was a dangerous film, I was telling my dad it so clearly is not a dangerous film. Even at 11 or 12 years old, I could tell that it was a fucking lie. Anyway, what else? Another cannibal film. Oh, Eaten Alive's upgrade to UHD.
right.
We've got a Franco film coming. We've got yeah, I don't know if they'll be released by the time this goes live, but all the rest of the titles will be revealed next week.
Right. And so, yeah, so the sale starts what
Uh,
day?
yeah, it's Black Friday, which is basically the 29th of this month. So it'll be midnight on the 28th, basically, and it
Right.
goes through the weekend, and ends midnight on Monday.
And usually causes you guys a
Well, it has
massive.
in the past. So the last few years, this is another thing in the colorful history of Severin was that just basically we could not figure out a way to get the website to handle the traffic that came in right on midnight. And it took
Right.
us longer than some of our competitors to figure it out. But for the last 4 or 5 sales, there has been no issue. So we hope that
Okay.
now that we've got people specifically dedicated to that, that it won't happen.
Yeah. Now you know it's coming. You can
Well, we
battle
always
over
knew
the
it was
house.
coming. That was the thing. We always knew it was
Yeah.
coming. We'd done all that we could prepare, working with our web hosts and hosts of the of whatever the program is that we use to actually process the orders, all that kind of thing. They did all that preparation every time. We're like, this time it's going to be fine, and it wasn't. But I'll tell you, what's fun for me is, and I shouldn't laugh at other people's misery, but when
Of course you should.
for example, we go to the Cannes Film Festival and the tickets go on sale at fucking 7 a.m. Everybody's got up in the morning to be the first to get the tickets because they only last about 30 seconds. That site crashes as well. So everybody's refreshing and refreshing and refreshing. And that's like $1 billion film festival. So they have exactly the same thing. MoMA had that with their Kraftwerk tickets a few years ago. I mean,
Right.
it happens, even
Yeah.
to massive companies. But yeah, we certainly, were, it was miserable. It's traumatic even to think about because everybody's just like fucking yelling at you and just like, you're the worst. Oh my God, never shopping with you again. And it seems like that's everybody when you're just hearing it and you can't fix the problem. Seems like everybody in the world is saying that. Of course, again, it's a handful of very vocal
Excitable people.
people. Yes, exactly. Well, it was actually more than that, but you know what I mean. Once it starts
Yeah.
working, everyone's like, "Whoo, fine." you know.
Like, yeah, I will spend all that money after all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, have you got any projects lined up? I mean, I guess obviously you wouldn't want to talk about what they are, but is there another big documentary in the
Well,
offing?
the one that's actually still it's actually playing in Aberystwyth tomorrow at the Abattoir Festival is the recent one I did was Susanna, the Queen of Black Magic, which is a
Right.
real kind of a deep cut of a documentary, which, as they all do, started out as an extra and actually blossomed into a feature because the content was good enough to warrant that. It's interesting because it's quite a hard sell because to talk to
Mm.
people about like, hey, there's this Indonesian horror star who's the only woman in the history of horror who played like the aggressor rather than the aggressee multiple times. I'm like, that's the pitch, and they're like, Indonesia? Yeah, not interested, It's, but everyone who's seen it so far, I have to say, there's been the very positive reactions. But the good thing about that is that we did all the Haunts Volume 2 and an
Mm.
Indonesian film starring Susanna, because it's called Susanna, the Queen of Black Magic, and called Sundel Bolong, is in that. So
Right.
because of that, I was able to justify making this documentary, and which I'm very pleased with. And really, the documentaries that I want to make now are going to be about subjects like that which haven't been explored before
Yeah.
because we now think about how it was 25 years ago. There were very few documentaries about the making of these kinds of films, and
Mhm.
now there's millions of them because of the DVD era, many of which I've made, many of which, Federica, who works for us in Italy, has made, and so many other people who are good at this, and many who are not are doing, a documentary about Dario Argento's Tenebrae or whatever it may be. And
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know what else can be said about these things. And I'm not sure that I need to learn any more about Dario Argento at this point. And I love Dario Argento, don't get me wrong, but
Mm.
for something that I want to do as a documentary, I want it to be something that's got precious little coverage in the Western world, at least.
Yeah, and for those kind of films that nobody, or the people that nobody's covered that have had really interesting careers, like her, just like there's so many out there that I think I was complaining about this on something or other a while ago, that there's just so many of these people who are going to die and nobody will ever do a career interview with them
Yeah.
and get it down on record, and it's just such a shame.
Yeah, and I think, look, and I'm not trying to sort of put down my colleagues. Quite on the contrary, I
Oh
actually
no.
think it's important to get these things on record. And certainly, we've benefited from that, because some of the interviews we did at the beginning of my career when I got here, have become quite valuable, because they're the only interview with such and
Yeah.
such. Like the only interview with Nick Rogue on camera about Don't Look Now is
Mm.
we did. I wouldn't say the only, but the only one that was done as a disc extra,
Yeah.
which can
The
be.
only retrospective one, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So there's lots of examples like that. So it is, I agree, it's very important to get these first-hand accounts. But I'm talking the difference between, the special feature, which I still take very seriously. I still want
Mm.
them to be produced professionally, and something that I want to do as a feature
Yeah.
document
Yeah.
is different.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be something with a story, I suppose, then, hasn't it?
Yeah. Like I got lucky with Chainsaw, because the family portrait documentary had already been done, and we tried to get that. But for one reason or another, we couldn't get the rights to it. So that was the impetus for me doing my own Chainsaw documentary, because that one
Yeah.
had not been available in England. And at that point, most of the people were still alive when we went out and did that. And the other lucky thing is that's one of the greatest making of stories that there is, in terms of
Yeah.
how they managed to put that together, all the different characters with their supreme talents that were brought to the table to make this incredible film. They all hadn't really, done that much talking about it at that time, possibly the
Mm.
exception Toby Hooper, but and Gunnar Hansen, but the rest of the lot, the Wayne Bells, the Bob Burns, hadn't really done in-depth interviews about the subject. Now there's a million Texas Chainsaw Massacre documentaries. I think two feature documentaries came out within the last year about Texas Chainsaw
Yeah.
Massacre, but most of the people sadly are no longer with us.
So thanks a lot to David Gregory for taking the time to talk to us, and as I said at the start of this, we'll be doing a lot more interviews on a more regular basis, so stay tuned for those. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.